Hello, my name is Norman Blumensaadt, the Artistic Director of Different Stages Theater in Austin, Texas. Tonight, January 6th, the 12th day of Christmas and the Epiphany, we offer an online Zoom reading of Charles Dickens' The Cricket on the Hearth. In its time period, Cricket on the Hearth was more well-beloved and known than A Christmas Carol is in our time period. Crickets are a symbol of good luck. As Dot Peerybingle says in Cricket on the Hearth, to have a cricket on the hearth is the luckiest thing in the world. So for 2021, we wish you health, good luck, and a joyous new year. If when this is over, you would wish to donate to Different Stages, there will be a link to the differentstagestheater.org donate button. Thank you.
Chapter 1, Chirp the First. The kettle began it. Don't tell me what Mrs. Peerybingle said. I know better. Mrs. Peerybingle may leave it on the record to the end of time.
That she couldn't say which of them began it, but I say the kettle did.
The kettle began it before the cricket uttered even a chirp.
And the fact is that the kettle began it
at least 5 minutes before the cricket gave any sign of being in existence. Contradict me and I'll say 10.
It appeared as if there were a sort of match, a trial of skill, you must understand, between the kettle and the cricket. And this is what led to it and how it came about. Mrs. Peerybingle, going out into the raw twilight, filled the kettle at the water butt. Presently returning, she set the kettle on the fire. In doing so, she lost her temper, or mislaid it for an instant, for the water being uncomfortably cold and in that slippy, slushy, sleety sort of state wherein it seems to penetrate through every kind of substance, had laid hold of Mrs. Peerybingle's toes and even splashed her legs. Besides, the kettle was aggravating and obstinate. It was quarrelsome and hissed and sputtered morosely at the fire. To sum up all, the lid, resisting Mrs. Peerybingle's fingers, first of all turned topsy-turvy, and then with an ingenious pertinacity deserving of a better cause, dived sideways in, down to the very bottom of the kettle. And the lid of that kettle employed a monstrous resistance against Mrs. Peerybingle before she got it up again. It looked sullen and pig-headed enough, even then, carrying its handle with an air of defiance and cocking its spout pertly and mockingly at Mrs. Peerybingle, as if it said, "I won't boil. Nothing shall induce me."
Mrs. Peerybingle, with restored good humour, dusted her chubby little hands against each other and laid down before the kettle and sat laughing. Now it was, you observe, that the kettle began to spend the evening. Now it was that after 2 or 3 such vain attempts to stifle its convivial sentiments, it threw off all moroseness and burst into a stream of song so cosy and hilarious as never Maudlin Nightingale yet formed the least idea of.
That this song of the kettles was a song of invitation and welcome to somebody out of doors, to somebody at that very moment coming in on towards the snug small home in the crisp fire, there's no doubt whatever.
And here, if you like, the cricket did chime in with a chirp, chirp, chirp of such magnitude that its voice so astoundingly disproportionate to its size as compared with the kettle, that if it had then and there burst itself like an overcharged gun and chirruped its little body into 50 pieces, it would have seemed a natural and inevitable consequence.
The kettle had had the last of its solo performance. It persevered with undiminished ardor.
But the cricket took first fiddle and kept it. Good heaven, how it chirped! Its shrill, sharp, piercing voice resounded through the house. There was an indescribable little trill and tremble in it at its loudest, which suggested its being carried off by its little legs' own intense enthusiasm. Yet they went very well together, the cricket.
And the kettle. The burden of the song was still the same.
And louder, louder, louder still?
They sang it in their emulation. The fair little listener, for fair she was, and young, lighted a candle, glanced at Clock, who was getting in a pretty average crop of minutes, and looked out of the window where she saw nothing, owing to the darkness but her own face imaged in the glass. When she came back and sat down in her former seat, the cricket and the kettle were still keeping it up with a perfect fury of competition.
The kettle's weak side clearly being that he didn't know when he was beat.
There was all the excitement of a race about it.
Chirp, chirp, chirp! Cricket a mile ahead!
Hum, hum, hum. The kettle's sticking it to him. No idea of giving in.
Chirp, chirp, chirp. Cricket going in to finish him.
Hum, hum, hum. The kettle not to be finished. Until at last, they got so jumbled together in the hurry, scurry, helter-skelter of the match that whether the kettle chirped,
And the cricket hummed,
or the cricket chirped and the kettle hummed, or they both chirped and both hummed, it would have taken a clearer head than yours or mine to have decided with anything like certainty.
Of this, there is no doubt that the kettle and the cricket at one and the same moment sent each his fireside song of comfort streaming into a ray of candle that shone out through the window and a long way down the lane. And this light, bursting on a certain person, on the instant approached towards it through the gloom and expressed the whole thing to him. "Welcome home, old fellow, welcome home, my boy."
This entertained the kettle, being dead beat, boiled over, and was taken off the fire.
Mrs. Peerybingle then went running to the door, where what with the wheels of a cart, the tramp of a horse, the voice of a man, the tearing in and out of an excited dog, and the surprising and mysterious appearance of a baby, there was soon the very what's-his-name to pay.
Where the baby came from, or how Mrs. Peerybingle got a hold of it in that flash of time, I don't know. But a live baby there was in Mrs. Peerybingle's arms, and a pretty tolerable amount of pride she seemed to have in it, when she was drawn gently to the fire by a sturdy figure of a man, much taller and much older than herself, who had to stoop a long way down to kiss her. But she was worth the trouble.
6'6" with the lumbago might have done it.
Oh, goodness, John, what a state you are in with the weather.
Why, you see, Dot, John made answer slowly as he unrolled a shawl from about his throat and warmed his hands. It ain't exactly summer weather, so no wonder.
I wish you wouldn't call me Dot, John. I don't like it, said Mrs. Peerybingle, pouting in such a way that clearly showed she did like it very much.
Why, what else are you? Returned John, looking down upon her with a smile and giving her waist as light a squeeze as huge hand and arm could give. A dot and, here he glanced at the baby, a dot and carry. I won't say it for fear I should spoil it, but I was very near a joke. I don't know if ever I was nearer.
It was pleasant to observe how Tilly Slowboy, waiting in the background for the baby, took special cognizance, though in her earliest teens, of this grouping, and stood with her mouth wide open and her eyes and her head thrust forward, taking it in as if it were air.
Nor was it less agreeable to observe how John the carrier, reference being made by Dot, the aforesaid baby, checked his hand, went on the point of touching the infant, as if he thought he might crack it, and bending down, surveyed it from a safe distance with a kind of puzzled pride, if he found himself one day the father of a canary.
Ain't he beautiful, John? Don't he look precious in his sleep?
Very precious, very much so. He generally is asleep, ain't he?
Lord, John, good gracious, no.
Oh, I thought his eyes was generally shut. Hello, it ain't right for him to look up that way, is it? See how he's winking with both of them at once, and look at his mouth. Why, he's gasping like a gold and silver fish.
You don't deserve to be a father, you don't, said Dot, with all the dignity of an experienced matron. But how should you know what little complaints children are troubled with, John?
No, said John, pulling off his outer coat. It's very true, Dot. I don't know much about it. I only know that I've been fighting pretty stiffly with the winds tonight. It's been blowing from the northeast straight into the cart the whole way home.
Poor old man, so it has, cried Mrs. Peerybingle, instantly becoming very active. Here, take the precious darling, Tilly, while I make myself of some use. Blessed, I could smother it with kissing, I could. Hi then, good dog. Hi, boxer boy. Only let me make the tea first, and then I'll help you with the parcels like a busy bee.
John went out to see that the boy with the lantern, which had been dancing to and fro before the door and window like a will-o'-the-wisp, took due care of the horse, who was fatter than you would quite believe, and so old that his birthday was lost in the mists of antiquity.
boxer dashed in and out with bewildering inconsistency, now describing a circle of short barks around the horse where he was being rubbed down at the stable door, now feigning to make a savage rush at his mistress and facetiously bringing himself to sudden stops.
Now, eliciting a shriek from Tilly Slowboy in the low nursing chair near the fire by the unexpected application of his moist nose to her countenance, now going round and round upon the hearth and lying down as if he had established himself for the night, now getting up again and taking that nothing of a fag end of a tail of his out into the weather as if he had just remembered an appointment and was off to keep it.
There's the teapot ready on the hob, said Dot, as briskly busy as a child at play at keeping house. And there's the old knuckle of ham, and there's the butter, and there's the crusty loaf and all. Here's the clothes basket for the small parcels, John, if you've got any there. Where are you, John?
It may be noted of Miss Slowboy, in spite of her rejecting the caution with some vivacity, that she had a rare and surprising talent for getting this baby into difficulties and had several times imperiled its short life in quite a way peculiarly her own. She was a spare and straight shape, this young lady, insomuch that her garments appeared to be in constant danger of sliding off those sharp pegs, her shoulders on which they were loosely hung. Being always in a state of gaping admiration at everything, and absorbed besides in the perpetual contemplation of her mistress's perfections and the baby's, Miss Slowboy, in her little errors of judgment, may be said to have done equal honor to her head and her heart. And though these did less honor to the baby's head, which they were the occasional means of bringing into contact with deal doors, dresses, stair rails, bedposts, and other foreign substances, still they were the honest result of Tilly Slowboy's constant astonishment at finding herself so kindly treated and installed in such a comfortable home, for the maternal and paternal Slowboy were alike unknown to fame, and Tilly had been bred by public charity, a foundling.
The cricket began to chirp again, vehemently. Chirp, 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 chirp.
Hey, it's merrier than ever tonight, I think.
And it's sure to bring us good fortune, John. It always has done so. To have a cricket on the hearth is the luckiest thing in all the world. The first time I heard its cheerful note, John, was on the night when you brought me home, when you brought me to my new home here, its little mistress, nearly a year ago. You recollect, John?
Why, so do I then. So do I, Dot.
I love it for the many times I have heard it, and the many thoughts its harmless music has given me. Sometimes in the twilight, when I was felt a little solitary and downhearted, John, before the baby was here to keep me company, when I have thought how lonely you would be if I should die, how lonely I would be if I could know that you had lost me, dear.
Its chirp, chirp, chirp upon the hearth
has seemed to tell me of another little voice so sweet, so dear to me, before whose coming sound made trouble like a vanished dream. And when I used to fear, for I did fear once, John, I was very young, you know, that ours might prove to be an ill-assorted marriage, I being such a child and you more like my guardian than my husband, and that you might not, however hard you tried, be able to learn to love me as you had hoped and prayed you might.
Its chirp, 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 chirp
has cheered me up again and filled me with a new trust and confidence. I was thinking of these things tonight, dear, when I sat expecting you, and I love the cricket for their sake.
How you talk! I had learnt that long before I brought you here to be the cricket's little mistress, Dot.
The next moment she was down upon her knees before the basket and busy with the parcels. There are not many of them tonight, John, but I saw some goods behind the cart just now, and though they give more trouble, perhaps, still they pay as well, so we have no reason to grumble, have we? Besides, you've been delivering, I dare say, as you came along.
Oh, yes, a good many.
Why, what's in this round box? Heart alive, John, it's a wedding cake.
Leave a woman alone to find out that. Now, a man would never have thought of it, whereas it's my belief that if you was to pack a wedding cake up in a tea chest or a turnip bedstead or a pickled salmon keg, a woman would be sure to find it out directly. Yes, I called for it at the pastry cook's.
And it weighs, I don't know what, whole 100 weights, cried Dot, making a great demonstration trying to lift it. Whose is it, John? Where is it going?
Read the writing on the other side.
Why, John, my goodness, John.
Ah, who'd have thought it?
You never mean to say, pursued Dot, sitting on the floor and shaking her head at him, that it's Gruff and Tackleton, the toy maker?
Miss Slowboy, in the meantime, who had a mechanical power of reproducing scraps of current conversation for the delectation of the baby, with all the sense struck out of them and all the nouns changed into the plural number, inquired aloud of that young creature, "Was it Gruffs and Tackletons, the toy makers then? And would it call it pastry cooks for wedding cakes? And did its mothers know the boxes when its fathers brought them home?" And so on.
And that is really to come about. Why, she and I were girls at school together, John, and he's as old, as unlike her. Why, how many years older than you is Gruff and Tackleton, John?
Yeah, how many more cups of tea shall I drink tonight at one sitting than Gruff and Tackleton ever took in 4, I wonder? As to eating, I eat but little, but that little I enjoy, Dot. Even this, his usual sentiment at mealtimes, one of his innocent delusions, for his appetite was always obstinate and flatly contradicted him. It awoke no smile in the face of his little wife, who stood among the parcels, pushing the cake box slowly from her with her foot.
Absorbed in thought, she stood there, heedless alike of the tea and John, until he rose and touched her on the arm, when she looked at him for a moment and hurried to her place behind the tea-board, laughing at her negligence, but not as she had laughed before. The manner and the music were quite changed. So these are all the parcels, are they, John?
That's all. Why, no. Laying down his knife and fork and taking a long breath, I declare I've clean forgotten the old gentleman.
The old gentleman?
In the cart. He was asleep amongst the straws the last time I saw him. I very nearly remembered him twice since I came in, but he went out of my head again. Hello, you here? Yeah, arose, yep. John said these latter words outside the door, whither he had hurried with the candle in his hand.
Miss Slowboy, conscious of some mysterious reference of the old gentleman, and connecting in her mystified imagination certain associations of a religious nature with the phrase, was so disturbed that hastily rising from the low chair by the fire to seek protection near the skirts of her mistress, and coming into contact as she crossed the doorway with an ancient stranger, she instinctively made charge or butt at him with the only offensive instrument within her reach. This instrument happening to be the baby, great commotion and alarm ensued, with the sagacity of Boxer rather tended to increase, for that good dog, more thoughtful than its master, had it seemed been watching the old gentleman in his sleep.
You're such an undeniable good sleeper, sir, said John when tranquility was restored. In the meantime, the old gentleman had stood bareheaded and motionless in the center of the room, that I have half a mind to ask you where the other 6 are. Only that would be a joke, and I know I would spoil it. Very near, though, very near.
The stranger, who had long white hair, good features, singularly bold and well defined for an old man, and dark, bright, penetrating eyes, looked round with a smile, and saluted the terrier's wife by gravely inclining his head. His garb was very quaint and odd, a long, long way behind the time. Its hue was brown all over. In his hand he held a great brown club or walking stick, and striking this upon the floor, it fell asunder and became a chair, on which he sat down quite composedly.
There! That's the way I found him, sitting by the roadside, upright as a millstone, and almost as deaf.
Sitting in the open air, John?
In the open air, just at dusk. Carriage paid, he said, and gave me 18 pence. Then he got in, and there he is.
If you please, I was to be left till called for. Don't mind me. With that, he took a pair of spectacles from one of his large pockets and a book from another, and leisurely began to read, making no more of Boxer than if he had been a house lamb.
The carrier and his wife exchanged a look of perplexity. The stranger raised his head and, glancing from the latter to the former, said,
Your daughter, my good friend?
Wife.
Niece?
Wife!
Indeed, surely very young. He quietly turned over and resumed his reading, but before he could have read 2 lines, he again interrupted himself to say, Baby yours?
John gave him a gigantic nod, equivalent to the answer in the affirmative delivered through a speaking trumpet.
Girl?
Boy!
Also very young, eh?
Mrs. Peerybingle instantly struck in. 2 months and 3 days. Vaccinated just 6 weeks ago. Took very finely. Considered by the doctor a remarkably beautiful child, equal to the general run of children at 5 months old. Takes notice in a way quite wonderful. May seem impossible to you, but feels his legs already.
Here, the breathless little mother, who had been shrieking these short sentences into the old man's ear until her pretty face was crimsoned, held up the baby before him as a stubborn and triumphant fact, while Tilly Slowboy, with a melodious cry of "Catcher! Catcher!" which sounded like some unknown words adapted to a popular sneeze, performed some cow-like gambols round that all-unconscious innocent.
Hark, he's called for, sure enough. There's somebody at the door. Open it up, Tilly.
Being opened, it gave admission to a little meager, thoughtful, dingy-faced man who seemed to have made himself a greatcoat from the sackcloth covering of some old box, for when he turned to shut the door and keep the weather out, he disclosed upon the back of that garment the inscription of G&T in large black letters. Good evening, John. Good evening, Mom. Good evening, Tilly. Good evening, how's baby, Mom? The box is pretty well, I hope.
All thriving, Caleb. I'm sure you only need to look at the dear child for one to know that.
Oh, and I'm sure I only need to look at you for another.
Busy just now, Caleb?
Yeah, pretty much so, but there's rather a run on Noah's Arks at present. I could have wished to improve upon the family, but I don't see how it's to be done at the price. Well, have you got anything in the parcel line for me, John?
The carrier put his hand into the pocket of a coat he'd taken off and brought out, carefully preserved in moss and paper, a tiny flower pot.
Yes. There it is, he said, adjusting it with great care. Is it not so much as a leaf damage? It's full of buds, huh?
Dear Caleb, very dear at this season.
Oh, never mind that. It would be cheap to me, whatever it cost. Is there anything else, John?
A small box. Here you are.
For Caleb Plummer with cash. With cash, John? I don't think it's for me.
With care. Where do you make out cash?
Oh, yes, with care. To be sure, it's all right with care. Yes, that's mine. They might have been with the cash indeed if my dear old boy in the golden South Americas had lived, John. Yes, you loved him like a son, didn't you? No, you needn't say you did. I know, of course. Yes, Caleb Plummer with care. Yes, it's all right. It's a box of doll's eyes for my daughter's work. I wish it was her own sight in a box, John.
I wish it was or could be.
Oh, thank you. You speak very hearty. To think that she should never see the dolls and them staring at her so bold all day long. Now, that's where it cuts. What's the damage, John?
I'll damage you if you inquire. Stop. Very near?
It's like you to say so. It's your kind way. Let me see. I think that's all.
I think not. Try again.
Something for a governor, eh? Said Caleb after pondering just a little while. Yeah, to be sure. Yes, that's what I came for. But my head's so running on them arcs and things. He hasn't been here, has he?
Oh, not he. He's too busy courting, huh?
He's coming round, though, for he told me to keep on the near side of the road going home. And it was 10 to 1 he'd take me up. Well, now I had better go. By the by, you couldn't have the goodness to let me pinch Boxer's tails, Mum, for half a moment, could you?
Oh, why, Caleb, what a question.
Oh, no, never mind, Mom. He might not like it. Perhaps there's a small order just come in for barking dogs. I should wish to go as close as nature as I could for sixpence. That's all. Oh, never mind, Mom.
It happened opportunely that Boxer, without receiving the proposed stimulus, began to bark with great zeal. But as this implied the approach of some new visitor, Caleb, postponing his study from a life to a more convenient season, shouldered the round box and took a hurried leave. He might have spared himself the trouble, for he met a visitor upon the fresh threshold.
Oh, you are here, are you? Wait a bit. I'll take you home. John Peerybingle, my service to you. Oh, and more of my service to your pretty wife. Handsomer every day. Better, too, if possible. And younger. That's the devil of it.
I should be astonished at your paying compliments, Mr. Tackleton, but for your condition.
You know all about it, then.
I have got myself to believe it somehow.
After a hard struggle, I suppose.
Very.
Tackleton the toy merchant, pretty generally known as Gruff and Tackleton, for that was the firm, though Gruff had been bought out long ago, only leaving his name, and some said his nature, according to its dictionary meaning, in the business. Tackleton the toy merchant was a man whose vocation had been quite misunderstood by his parents and guardians. They might have made him a moneylender, or a sharp attorney, or a sheriff's officer. He might have sown his discontented oats in his youth, and after having had the full run of himself in ill-natured transactions, might have turned out amiable at last for the sake of a little freshness and novelty. But cramped and shaking in the peaceable pursuit of toy-making, he was a domestic ogre who had been living on children all his life and was their implacable enemy. He despised all toys, delighted in his malice to insinuate grim expressions into the faces of brown paper farmers who drove pigs to market, movable old ladies who darned stockings or carved pies, and other like samples of his stock in trade. He was great in such inventions. "That's my wedding day," said Tackleton, rattling his money.
Why, it's our wedding day, too.
Odd. You're just such another couple. Just.
The indignation of Dot at this presumptuous assertion is not to be described.
"I say, a word with you," murmured Tackleton, nudging the carrier with his elbow and taking him a little apart. "You'll come to the wedding, huh? We're in the same boat, you know."
How in the same boat?
"A little disparity, you know," said Tackleton with another nudge. "Come and spend an evening with us beforehand."
Why? Demanded John, astonished at this pressing hospitality.
"Why? That's a new way of receiving an invitation. Why, for the pleasure, sociability, you know, all that."
I thought you were never sociable.
It's of no use to be anything but free with you, I see. Well, then, the truth is that you have what tea-drinking people call a sort of comfortable appearance together, you and your wife. Well, we know better, you know, but...
No, we don't know better. What are you talking about?
Well, we don't know better, then. We agree that we don't. As I was going to say, as you have that sort of appearance, your company will produce a favorable effect on Mrs. Tackleton, that will be. And though I don't think your good lady's very friendly to me in this matter, still she can't help herself from falling into my views, for there's a compactness and coziness of appearance about her that always tells, even in an indifferent case. You say you'll come?
We have arranged to keep our wedding day, as far as that goes, at home. We have made the promise to ourselves this 6 months. We think, you see, that home...
What's home? 4 walls and a ceiling. It's
Chirp! Chirp, 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 chirp,
Why
chirp,
don't
chirp,
you
chirp,
kill that cricket? I
chirp.
would. I always do. I hate their noise. There are 4 walls and a ceiling at my house. Come to me.
You kill your crickets, eh?
Scrunch 'em, sir, returned the other, setting his heel heavily on the floor. You say you'll come? It's as much as your interest as mine, you know, that the women should persuade each other that they're quiet and contented and couldn't be better off. Well, whatever one woman says, another woman is determined to clinch. Always. There's that spirit of emulation about them, sir, that if your wife says to my wife, I'm the happiest woman in the world, and mine's the best husband in the world, and I dote on him, my wife will say the same to yours, or more, and half believe it.
Do you mean to say she don't then?
Don't what?
That she don't believe it.
I have the humour, said Tackleton, holding up the fingers of his left hand and tapping the forefinger to imply, there I am, Tackleton to wit. I have the humour, sir, to marry a young wife, and a pretty wife. Here he rapped his little finger to express the bride, not sparingly, but sharply, with a sense of power. I'm able to gratify that humour, and I do. It's my whim. But now look there.
He pointed to where Dot was sitting thoughtfully before the fire, leaning her dimpled chin upon her hand and watching the bright blaze. The carrier looked at her, and then at him, and then at her, and then at him again.
He honours and obeys, no doubt, you know, and that, as I am not a man of sentiment, is quite enough for me, but do you think there's anything more in it?
I think that I should chuck any man out of a window who said there weren't.
Exactly so. To be sure, doubtless you would. Of course, I am certain of it. Good night. Pleasant dreams.
The carrier was puzzled and made uncomfortable and uncertain. In spite of himself, he couldn't help showing it in his manner.
Good night, my dear friend. I'm off. We're exactly alike in reality, you see. You won't give us tomorrow evening. Well, next day you'll go out visiting, I know. I'll meet you there, and I'll bring my wife, that is to be. It'll do her good. You're agreeable? Thank ye. What's that?
Stranger had advanced towards the fire to warm himself and stood within a short stride of her chair, but quite still.
Mary! Exclaimed the carrier, supporting her in his arms. Are you ill? What is it? Tell me, dear.
She only answered by beating her hands together. I'm better, John. I'm quite well now. John.
But John was on the other side of her. Dot turned her face towards the strange old gentleman as if addressing him.
Only a fancy, John dear. A kind of shock. Something coming suddenly before my eyes. I don't know what it was. It's quite gone. Quite gone.
I'm glad it's gone. Caleb, come here. Who's that with the grey hair?
I don't know, sir. I've never seen him before in all my life. He's a beautiful figure for a nutcracker. Quite a new model, with a screw jaw opening down into his waistcoat. Oh, he would be lovely.
Not ugly enough.
Or for a firebox, either. Oh, what a model. You unscrew his head, you put the matches in, you turn the nails upwards for the light, and what a firebox for the gentleman's mantle shelf just as he stands, huh?
Not ugly, half ugly enough. Then come and bring that box. All right now, I hope.
Oh, quite gone. Quite gone. Good night.
Good night. Good night, John Peerybingle. Take care how you carry that box, Caleb. Let it fall and I'll murder you. Dark as pitch, and weather worse than ever, eh? Good night. So, with another sharp look round the room, he went out the door, followed by Caleb, with the wedding cake on his head.
The carrier had been so much astounded by his little wife and so busily arranged in soothing and handling her that he had scarcely been conscious of the stranger's presence until now, when he again stood there, their only guest. "We don't belong to them, you see. I must go give him a hint to go."
I beg your pardon, friend," said the old gentleman, advancing to him. "The more so as I fear your wife has not been well, but the attendant to my infirmity," he touched his ears and shook his head, "renders almost indispensable, not having arrived. I fear there must be some mistake. The bad night which made the shelter of your comfortable cot, may I never have a worse, so acceptable, is still as bad as ever. Would you, in your kindness, suffer me to rent a bed here?"
Oh, yes, certainly.
"Oh," said the carrier, surprised by the rapidity of the consent. "Well, I don't object, but still I'm not quite sure
Hush,
that..."
John. Hush, dear John.
"Why, he's stone deaf."
I know he is, but yes, sir, certainly. I'll make him up a bed directly, John.
As she hurried off to do it, the flutter of her spirits and the agitation of her manner was so strange that the carrier stood looking after her quite confounded. "Did its mother's make up it a bed then?" cried Mrs. Slowboy to the baby. "And did its hair grow brown and curly when its caps was lifted off and frightened it a precious pets a-sitting by the fires?"
With that unaccountable attraction of the mind to trifles, which is often incidental to a state of doubt and confusion, the carrier found himself mentally repeating even these absurd words many times, so many times that he got them by heart and was still conning them over and over.
When Tilly, after administering as much friction to the little bald head with her hand as she thought wholesome, had once more tied the baby's cap on, "and frightened it a precious pets a-sitting by the fires."
"What frightened Dot? I wonder," mulled the carrier, pacing to and fro.
The bed was soon made ready, and the visitor, declining all refreshment but a cup of tea, retired.
Then Dot, quite well again, arranged the great chair in the chimney corner for her husband, filled his pipe and gave it him, and took her usual little stool beside him on the hearth.
Chapter 2, Chub the Second.
Caleb Plummer and his daughter lived all alone by themselves in a little cracked nutshell of a wooden house, which was, in truth, no better than a pimple on the prominent red brick nose of Gruff and Tackleton. The premises of Gruff and Tackleton were the great feature of the street, but you might have knocked down Caleb Plummer's dwelling with a hammer or two and carried off the pieces in a cart. Now, under its crazy roof, the Gruff before last had, in her small way, made toys for a generation of old boys and girls who had played with them and found them out and broken them and gone to sleep.
The girl never knew that the ceilings were discolored, walls blotched and bare of plaster here and there, high crevices unstopped and widening every day, beams moldering and tending downward.
Yes, and all was Caleb's doing.
But he too had a cricket on his hearth, and listening sadly to its music when its motherless child was very young, that spirit had inspired him with the thought that even her great deprivation might be almost changed into a blessing, and the girl made happy by these little means.
Caleb and his daughter worked together in their usual working room, which served them for their ordinary living room as well. And a strange place it was. See, there were houses in it, finished and unfinished, for dolls and all stations in life. And there were various other samples of his handicraft besides dolls. But there were Noah's Arks, in which the birds and the beasts were an uncommonly tight fit, I assure you, though they could be crammed in anyhow at the roof and rattled and shaken into the smallest compass. And in the midst of all these objects, Caleb and his daughter sat at work.
The blind girl, busy as a doll's dressmaker.
Caleb painting and glazing the four-pair front of a desirable family mansion.
So you were out in the rain last night, Father, in your beautiful new greatcoat.
Yes, in my beautiful new greatcoat. answered Caleb, glancing towards a closed line in the room on which the sackcloth garment previously described was carefully hung up to dry.
How glad I am you bought it, father.
And of such a tailor, too. Quite a fashionable tailor. No, it's too good for me.
Too good, father? What can be too good for you?
I'm half ashamed to wear it, though, said Caleb, watching the effect of what he said upon her brightening face. See, upon my word, when I hear the boys and people say behind me, "Hello, here's us," well, I don't know which way to look. And when the beggar wouldn't go away last night, and when he said I was a very common man, said, No, Your Honor, bless Your Honor, don't say that. Now, I was quite ashamed. I really felt as if I hadn't the right to wear it.
I see you, father, as plainly as if I had the eyes I never want when you are with me. A blue coat.
They're bright blue.
Made loose to the figure, cried the blind girl. And in it, you, dear father, with your merry eye, your smiling face, your free step, and your dark hair, looking so young and handsome.
I should be vain presently.
I think you are already. I know you, father. I found you out, you see.
Let's see. Oh, there we are. As near the real thing as sixpenneth of halfpence is to sixpence. Oh, what a pity the whole front of the house opens at once. Now, there's only a staircase in it now, and regular doors to the rooms to go in at. No, but that's the worst of my calling. I'm always deluding myself and swindling myself.
You are tired, father?
Tired? What you tired me, Bertha? I was never tired. What does that mean?
To give the greater force to his words, he checked himself in an involuntary imitation of two half-length stretching and yawning figures on the mantel shelf, who were represented as in one eternal state of weariness from the waist upwards, and hummed a fragment of a song.
What? You're singing, are you? Said Tackleton, putting his head in at the door. Go it. I can't sing.
Nobody would have suspected him of it. He hadn't what is generally termed a singing face by any means.
I can't afford to sing. I'm glad you can. I hope you can afford to work, too. Hardly time for both, I should think.
Oh, if you could only see him, Bertha, how he's winking at me. Such a man, such a joke. You'd think if you didn't know him, he was in earnest, wouldn't you now?
The blind girl smiled and nodded.
The bird that can sing and won't sing must be made to sing, they say.
Yes, the extent to which he's winking at this moment. Oh, my gracious.
Always merry and light-hearted with us.
Oh, you're there too, are you? Well, and being there, how are you?
Oh, well, I'm quite well. As happy as even you can wish me to be. As happy as you would make the whole world if you could.
There's no gleam of reason. Not a gleam.
The girl took his hand and kissed it, held it for a moment in her own two hands, and laid a cheek against it tenderly. There was such unspeakable affection and such fervent gratitude in the act that Tackleton himself was moved to say, in a milder growl than usual,
What's the matter now?
I stood it close beside my pillow when I went to sleep last night, and I remembered it in my dreams, and when the day broke and the glorious red sun... The red sun, father?
Yes, red in the mornings and in the evenings, Bertha, said poor Caleb with a woeful glance at his employer.
When it rose in the bright light, I almost feel myself to strike myself against, and walking came into the room. I turned the little tree towards it, and blessed heaven for making things so precious, and blessed you for sending it to cheer me up.
A bedlam broke loose. We shall arrive at the strait waistcoats and mufflers soon. Shall I tell you a secret, Bertha?
If you will.
This is the day on which little, what's her name, the spoilt child, Peerybingle's wife, she pays a regular visit to you. Makes a fantastic picnic, ain't it? I thought so. I should like to join the party.
Do you hear that, father?
Yes, yes, I hear it, but I don't believe it. It must be one of my lies, I've no doubt. Huh?
You see, I want to bring the Peerybingles a little more into company with May Fielding. I'm going to be married to May.
Oh,
Married?
Ah, Bertha, married, church, parson, clerk, beadle, glass coach, bells, breakfast, bride cake, favors, marrowbones, all the rest of the tomfoolery. A wedding, you know, a wedding. Don't you know what a wedding is?
I know. I understand.
Do you? It's more than I expected. Well, on that account, I want to join the party and to bring May and her mother. I'll send in a little something or other before the afternoon, a cold leg of mutton or some comfortable trifle of that sort. You'll expect me?
Yes. She had drooped her head and turned away, and so stood, with the hands crossed, musing.
I don't think you will, for you seem to have forgotten all about it already. Caleb!
I may venture to say I'm here, I suppose. Sir!
Take care she don't forget what I've been saying to her.
Oh, she never forgets. It's one of the few things she ain't clever in, huh?
Every man thinks his own geese swans. Poor devil. Having delivered himself of which remark with infinite content, old Gruff and Tackleton withdrew.
Father, I want my eyes, my patient, willing eyes.
Here they are, always ready. You know, they are yours more than mine, Bertha, any hour in the 24. Now, what shall your eyes do for you, dear?
Look round the room, Father.
All right.
Tell me about it.
Well, it's much the same as usual. Homely, but very snug. The gay colors on the walls, the bright flowers on the plates and dishes, the shining wood without beams or panels, the general cheerfulness and neatness of the building make it very pretty.
You have your working dress on, and are not so gallant as when you wear the handsome coat.
Not quite so gallant.
Father, tell me something about May. Is she very fair?
Ah, she is indeed. And she was indeed. Now, it was quite a rare thing to Caleb not to have to draw upon his invention.
Her hair is light, lighter than mine. Her voice is sweet and musical, I know. I have often loved to hear it. Her shape...
There's not a doll's in all the room to equal it, and her eyes.
Our friend, Father, our benefactor. I am never tired, you know, of hearing about him. He is older than May, Father.
Yes, he's a little older than me, but that don't mean a thing, huh?
In the meantime, there had been a pretty sharp commotion at John Peerybingle's, for little Mrs. Peerybingle naturally couldn't think of going anywhere without the baby, and to get the baby underway took time.
Mrs. Peerybingle took advantage of this interval to make herself as smart in a small way as ever you saw anybody in all your life, and during the same short truce,
Miss Slowboy insinuated herself into a Spencer of a fashion so surprising and ingenious that it had no connection with herself or anything else in the universe by this time. The baby, being all alive again, was invested by the united efforts of Mrs. Peerybingle and Miss Slowboy with a cream-colored mantle for its body, and so in course of time they all three got down the door.
as to a chair or anything of that kind for helping Mrs. Peerybingle into the cart, you know very little of John if you think that was necessary. Before you could have seen him lift her from the ground, there she was in her place, fresh and rosy, saying, "John, how can you? Think of Tilly."
If I might be allowed to mention a young lady's legs on any terms, I would observe of Miss Slowboy's that there was a fatality about them which rendered them singularly liable to be gazed. But as this might be considered ungenteel, I'll think of it.
John, you've got the basket with the veal and the ham pies and things and bottles of beer. If you haven't, you must turn around again this very minute.
It'll be time enough to do that when I begin to leave things behind me. The basket's here, safe enough.
What a hard-hearted monster you must be, John, not to have said so at once and saved me such a turn.
By the by, that old gentleman, he's an odd fish. Looking straight along the road for them. I can't make him out. I don't believe there's any harm in him.
None at all. I'm sure there's none at all.
Yes, said the carrier when his eyes attracted to her face by the great earnestness of her manner. I'm glad you feel so certain of it, because it's a confirmation to me. It's curious that he should have taken it into his head to ask leave to go on lodging with us, hasn't it? Things come about so strangely.
So very strangely.
However, he's a good-natured old gentleman and pays as a gentleman, and I think his word is to be relied upon, like a gentleman's. I had quite a long talk with him this morning. He can hear me better already, he says, as he gets more used to my voice.
Why, then I shall be returning home tonight your way, when I thought you'd be coming in an exactly opposite direction. That's capital. I may trouble you for another lift, perhaps, but I'll engage not to fall so sound asleep again.
He was sound asleep, surely. Dot, what are you thinking of?
Thinking of, John? I was listening to you.
Oh, well, that's all right. I was afraid from the look of your face that I'd got on rattling on so long as to set you thinking about something else.
Dot made no reply. They jogged on for some little time in silence. But it was not easy to remain silent very long in John Peerybingle's cart, for everyone on the road had something to say, though it might only be, "How are you?" and indeed it was very often nothing else.
The packages and parcels for the errand cart were numerous, and there were many stoppages to take them in and give them out, which were not by any means the worst parts of the journey. Some people were so full of expectation about their parcels, and other people were so full of wonder about their parcels, and other people were so full of inexhaustible directions about their parcels.
And John had such a lively interest in all the parcels that it was good as a play. The trip was a little foggy in the January weather. It was raw and cold, but who cared for such trifles?
Not Dot, decidedly.
Not Tilly Slowboy, for she deems sitting in a cart on any terms to be the highest point of human joys, the crowning circumstance of earthly hopes. Not the baby, I'll be sworn, for it's not in baby nature to be warmer or more sound asleep, though its capacity is great in both respects, than that blessed young Peerybingle was all the way.
But Boxer, who was in advance some quarter of a mile or so, had already passed the outskirts of town,
and gained the corner of the street where Caleb and his daughter lived. And long before they had reached his door, he and the girl were on the pavement waiting to receive them.
May Fielding was already come.
And so was her mother, a querulous chip of an old lady with a peevish face, who, in right of having preserved a waist like a bedpost, was supposed to be a most transcendent figure.
Gruff and Tackleton was also there, doing the agreeable with the evident sensation of being as perfectly at home and as unquestionably in his own element as a fresh young salmon on the top of the Great Pyramid.
May, my dear old friend, cried Dot, running up to meet her. What a happiness to see you.
Her old friend was, to the full, as hearty and as glad as she, and it really was, if you'll believe me, quite a pleasant sight to see them embrace.
Tackleton was a man of taste, beyond all question.
May was very pretty.
Tackleton had brought his leg of mutton, and, wonderful to relate, a tart besides. Well, we don't get married every day.
And in addition to these dainties, there were the veal and ham pies and things, as Mrs. Peerybingle called them, which were chiefly nuts and oranges and cakes and such.
When the repast was set forth on the board, flanked by Caleb's contribution, which was a great wooden bowl of smoking potatoes.
Tackleton led his intended mother-in-law to the post of honor, for the better of gracing the place.
The majestic old soul had adorned herself with a cap calculated to inspire the thoughtless with sentiments of awe.
Now, Caleb sat next to his daughter.
Dot and her old schoolfellow were side by side.
The good carrier took care of the bottom of the table.
Miss Slowboy was isolated for the time being from every article of furniture but the chair she sat on, that she might not have anything else to knock the baby's head against.
Ah, May, dear, dear, what changes. To talk of those merry school days makes one young again.
Why, you ain't particularly old, are you?
Look at my sober, plodding husband there. He adds 20 years to my age at least. Don't you, John?
40.
How many you'll add to May's, I'm sure I don't know, but she can't be much less than 100 years of age on her next birthday.
Ha ha! Hollow as a drum, that laugh, though, and he looked as if he could have twisted Dot's neck comfortably.
Dear, dear, only to remember how we used to talk at school about husbands we would choose. I don't know how young and how handsome and how gay and how lively mine was not to be. And as to May's, oh dear, I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I think what silly girls we were.
May seemed to know which to do, for the colour flushed into her face and tears stood in her eyes.
Even the very persons themselves, real live young men, were fixed on sometimes. We little thought about how things would come about. I never fixed on John, I'm sure. I never so much had thought of him. And if I had told you you were ever to be married to Mr. Tackleton, why, you'd have slapped me, wouldn't you, May?
Though May didn't say yes, she certainly didn't say no, or express no, by any means.
Well, you couldn't help yourselves for all that. You couldn't resist us, you see. Here we are. And where are your gay young bridegrooms now?
Some of them are dead and some of them are forgotten. Some of them, if they could stand among us at this moment, would not believe we were the same creatures, would not believe that what they saw and what they heard was real, and that we could forget them so. No, they would not believe one word of it.
Why, Dot?
May uttered no word, good or bad, but sat quite still.
The good lady, her mother, now interposed, observing, in the first instance, that girls were girls, and bygones bygones, and that so long as young people were young and thoughtless, they would probably conduct themselves like young and thoughtless persons. With regard to Mr. Tackleton, she said that he was, in an eligible point of view, a son-in-law to be desired. No one in the senses could doubt. She was very emphatic here. Then she remarked that she would not allude to the past and would not mention that her daughter had for some time rejected the suit of Mr. Tackleton. Finally, that she anticipated the greatest possible amount of bliss, not rapturous bliss, but the solid, steady-going article from the approaching nuptials. She concluded by informing the company that tomorrow was the day she had lived for expressly, and that when it was over, she would desire nothing better than to be packed up and disposed of in any genteel place of burial.
In order that the bottled beer might not be slighted, John Peerybingle proposed, tomorrow, the wedding day, and called upon them to drink a bumper to it, before he proceeded upon his journey. Goodbye, said stout John Peerybingle, pulling on his dreadnought coat. I shall be back at the old time. Goodbye to all.
With these good-natured words he strode away, and presently was heard, in company with Boxer, and the old horse and the cart making lively music down the road.
At what time the dreamy Caleb stood, watching his blind daughter with the same expression on his face. Bertha, what's happened? How changed you are, my darling, in a few hours since this morning. You were silent and dull all day. What is it? Tell me.
Bring her to me. May. Bring May.
Yes, dear Bertha, yes.
There is not in my soul a wish or a thought that is not for your good bride May. not the less, my bird, because today the knowledge that you were to be his wife has wrung my heart almost to breaking.
Come, come, dear Bertha, come away with me. Give her your arm, May, so. How composed she is, you see already, and how good it is of her to mind us, said the cheery little woman, kissing her upon the forehead. Come away, dear Bertha, come. And here's her good father will come with her, won't you, Caleb, to be sure? So bring me the baby, Tilly, she said, drawing a chair to the fire. And while I have it in my lap, here's Mrs. Fielding, Tilly, will tell me all about the management of babies and put me right in 20 points where I'm as wrong can be, won't you, Mrs. Fielding?
Oh, but this becoming deference to her experience on the part of the young mother was so irresistible that after a short affectation of humility, she began to enlighten her with the best grace in the world, and sitting bolt upright before the wicked Dot, she did, in half an hour, deliver more infallible domestic recipes and precepts than would, if acted upon, have utterly destroyed and done up that young Peerybingle, though he had been an infant Samson.
Wheels heard, a horse's feet, the barking of a dog, the gradual approach of all the sounds, the scratching paw of Boxer at the door.
Whose step is that?
Whose step? Why, mine.
The other step. The man's tread behind you.
She is not to be deceived. Come along, sir. You'll be welcome here, never fear. He spoke in a loud tone, and
As he spoke, the deaf old gentleman entered.
he's not so much of a stranger that you haven't seen him once, Caleb. You'll give him house room till we go?
Oh, surely, John, and take it as an honor.
He's the best company on earth to talk a secret in. I have reasonable good lungs, but he tries 'em, I can tell you. Sit down, sir. Sit down, old friends here, and glad to see you. He's full of admiration for you. Talked of nothing else the whole way here. Why, he's a brave old boy. I like him for it, huh?
I wish he had had a better subject, John, said Dot with an uneasy glance about the room, at Tackleton especially.
A better subject? There's no such thing. Hey, a game of cribbage, you and I? That's hearty. The cards and board, Dot, and a glass of beer here, if there's any left, small wife.
His challenge was addressed to the old lady, who, accepting it with gracious readiness, they were soon engaged upon the game.
At first the carrier looked about him, sometimes with a smile, and now and then called Dot to peep over his shoulder, look at his hand and advise him on some knotty point.
But his adversary, being a rigid disciplinarian, and subject to an occasional weakness in respect of pegging more than she was entitled to, required such vigilance on his part as left him neither eyes nor ears to spare.
Thus his whole attention gradually became absorbed into the cards, and he thought of nothing else until a hand upon his shoulder restored him to the consciousness of Tackleton.
I'm sorry to disturb you, but a word directly.
I'm going to deal. It's a crisis.
It is. Come here, man. There was that in his pale face, which made the other rise immediately and ask what the matter was. Hush! John Peerybingle, I am sorry for this. I am indeed. I have been afraid of it. I have suspected it from the first.
What is it? Asked the carrier with a frightened aspect.
Hush. I'll show you if you'll come with me.
The carrier accompanied him without another word. They went across a yard where stars were shining, and by a little side door into Tackleton's own counting house.
A moment. Can you bear to look through that window, do you think?
Why not?
A moment more. Don't commit any violence. It's of no use. It's dangerous, too. You're a strong-made man. You might do murder before you know it.
The carrier looked him in the face and recoiled a step as if he'd been struck. In one stride, he was at the window, and he saw
her, with the old man, old no longer, but erect and gallant, bearing in his hand the false white hair that had won his way into their desolate and miserable home. He saw her listening to him as he bent his head to whisper in her ear, and and suffering him to clasp her round the waist as they moved slowly down the dim wooden gallery towards the door by which they had entered it. He saw them stop, and saw her turn to have the face he loved so presented to his view, and saw her, with her own hands, adjust the wig upon his head, laughing as she did it at his unsuspicious nature.
He clenched his strong right hand at first, as if it would have beaten down a lion, but opening it immediately again, he spread it out before the eyes of Tackleton, for he was fonder than ever, even then, and so, as they passed out, fell down upon a desk, and was weak as any infant. He was wrapped up to the chin and busy with his horse and parcels when he came into the room, prepared for going home.
Now, John, dear. Good night, May. Good night, Bertha.
Tilly was hushing the baby, and she crossed and recrossed Tackleton a dozen times, repeating drowsily, "Did the knowledge that it was to be its wife then wring its hearts almost to breaking? And did its fathers deceive it from its cradles but to break its hearts at last?"
Now, Tilly, give me the baby. Good night, Mr. Tackleton. Where's John, for goodness sake?
Oh, he's going to walk beside the horse's head, said Tackleton, who helped her to her seat.
My dear John, walk tonight?
The muffled figure of her husband made a hasty sign in the affirmative.
And the false stranger,
And the little nurse being in their places, the old horse moved off.
When Tackleton had gone off likewise, escorting May and her mother home, poor Caleb sat down by the fire beside his daughter, anxious and remorseful at the core, and still saying in his wistful contemplation of her, "Have I deceived her from the cradle but to break her heart at last?"
After 3, chirp the 3rd.
The Dutch clock in the corner struck 10 when the carrier sat down by his fireside.
But slowly, slowly as the carrier sat brooding on his hearth, now cold and dark, other and fiercer thoughts began to rise within him as an angry wind comes rising in the night.
The stranger was beneath his outraged roof. 3 steps would take him to his chamber door. 1 blow would beat it in.
You might do murder before you knew it, Tackleton had said. How could it be murder if he gave the villain time to grapple with him, hand to hand? He was the younger man.
Yes, some lover who had won the heart that he had never touched, some lover of her early choice, of whom she had thought and dreamed, for whom she had pined and pined when he had fancied her so happy by his side.
She had been above stairs with the baby, getting it to bed.
As he sat brooding at the hearth,
She came down without his knowledge.
in the turning of the rack of his great misery, he lost all other sounds.
And she put her little stool at his feet.
He only knew it when he felt her hand upon his own and saw her looking up into his face. But he could not bear to see her crouching down upon the little seat where he had often looked on her with love and pride, so innocent and gay.
And when she rose and left him sobbing as she went,
He felt it a relief to have the vacant place beside him rather than her so long cherished presence. The more he felt this, the higher and the stronger rose the wrath against his enemy. He looked about him for a weapon. There was a gun hanging on the wall. He took it down and moved a pace or 2 toward the door of the perfidious stranger's room. He knew the gun was loaded. Some shadowy idea that it was just to shoot the man like a wild beast seized him. It urged him to the door, raised the weapon to his shoulder, fitted and nerved his finger to the trigger and cried, "Kill him!"
When suddenly the struggling fire illuminated the whole chimney with the glow of light, and the cricket on the hearth began to chirp.
He recoiled from the door like a man waking in a sleep, awakened from a frightful dream, and put the gun aside. Clasping his hands before his face, he then sat down again and beside the fire and found relief in tears.
The cricket on the hearth came out onto the room and stood in a fairy shape before him.
"I love it,"
said the fairy voice, repeating what he well remembered.
"for the many times I have heard it, and the many thoughts its harmless music has given me."
She said so. True.
"This has been a happy home, John, and I love the cricket for its sake."
It has been. Heaven knows she made it happy always until now.
"So gracefully sweet-tempered, so domestic, joyful, busy, and light-hearted,"
said the voice.
Otherwise I never could have loved her as I did.
"Do,"
As I did, he said, but not firmly. His faltering tongue resisted his control and would speak in its own way for itself and him.
The figure, in an attitude of invocation, raised its hand and said, "Upon your hearth."
The hearth she has blighted.
All things that speak the language of your hearth and home must plead for her, for they speak the truth.
His thoughts were constant to her image. It was always there. Again, the staring figures turned upon him all at once and seemed to say,
"Is this the wife who has forsaken you?"
Thus the night passed. The moon went down, the stars grew pale, the cold day broke, the sun rose.
The carrier still sat, musing in his chimney corner. He had sat there with his head upon his hands all night.
All night the faithful cricket began to chirp, chirp, chirp on the hearth. All night he had listened to its voice.
He rose up when it was broad day, washed and dressed himself. Couldn't go about his customary cheerful avocations. He wanted spirit for them, but it mattered the less, as it was Tackleton's wedding day and he had arranged to make the rounds by proxy. He thought to have gone merrily to church with Dot, but such plans were at an end. It was their own wedding day too. Ah, how little he had looked for such a close to such a year. The carrier had expected that Tackleton would pay him a visit early, and he was right. He had not walked to and fro before his own door many minutes when he saw the toy merchant coming in his chase along the road.
John Peerybingle, my good fellow, how do you find yourself this morning?
I have had a poor night, Master Tackleton. For I have been a good deal disturbed in my mind. But it's over now. Can you spare me half an hour for some private talk?
Oh, I came on purpose.
You are not married before noon, I think.
Oh, no. Plenty of time.
When they entered the kitchen, Tilly Slowboy was rapping at the stranger's door, which was only removed from it by a few steps, one of her very red eyes, for Tilly had been crying all night long because her mistress cried, was at the keyhole. She was knocking very loud and seemed frightened. "If you please, I can't make nobody hear. I hope nobody ain't gone and been and died. If you please."
Oh, Tackleton, too, kicked and knocked, and he, too, failed to get at least reply, but he thought of trying the handle of the door. And as it opened easily, he peeped in, looked in, went in, and soon came running out again. "John Peerybingle, I hope there's been nothing rash in the night."
The carrier turned upon him quickly.
"Because he's gone, and the window's open. I don't see any marks, to be sure. It's almost on a level with the garden, but I was afraid there might have been some scuffle, eh?"
Make yourself easy. He went into that room last night without harm in word or deed from me, and no one has entered it since. He is away of his own free will. I'd go out gladly at that door and beg my bread from house to house for the rest of my life if I could so change the past that he had never come. But he has come and gone, and I have done with him.
"Oh, well, I think he got off pretty easy," said Tackleton, taking a chair.
The sneer was lost upon the carrier, who sat down too and shaded his face with his hand for some little time before proceeding.
You showed me my wife last night, my wife that I love, secretly
And tenderly.
conniving at that man's disguise and giving him opportunities of meeting her alone. I think that there's no sight I wouldn't rather have seen than that. I think there's no man in the world I wouldn't rather have had show it me.
I confess to having had my suspicions always, and that has made me objectionable here, I know.
But as you did show it me, and nothing can shake it now. I'm a plain man, a rough man with very little to recommend me. Not a clever man, as you very well know. I am not a young man. I loved my Dot, because I had seen her grow up from a child in her father's house, because I knew how precious she was, because she had been my life for years and years. There's many men I can't compare with who would never could have loved my little Dot like me, I think, but I had not, I feel it now, sufficiently considered her.
To be sure, giddiness, frivolity, fickleness, love of admiration, not considered, all left out of sight. Ha!
You'd best not interrupt me. Do you understand me? You're wide of doing so. If yesterday I'd have struck a man down at a blow who dared breathe a word against her, today I'd set my foot upon his face if he was my own brother.
The toy merchant gazed at him in astonishment.
Did I consider that I took her at her age and with her beauty from her young companions? Never. I took advantage of her hopeful nature and her cheerful disposition, and I married her. I wish I never had, for her sake, not for mine.
The toy merchant gazed at him without winking.
That I could ever hope that she would be fond of me, that I could ever believe she was.
She made a show of it. She made such a show of it that, to tell you the truth, it was the origin of my misgivings.
And here he asserted the superiority of May Fielding, who certainly made no sort of show of being fond of him.
I only now begin to know how hard she has tried to be my dutiful and zealous wife. It will be some help and comfort to me when I am here alone.
Here alone? Oh, then you do make to take some notice of this.
I can release her from the daily pain of an unequal marriage and the struggle to conceal it. She shall be as free as I can render her.
Make her reparation? Twisting and turning his great ears with his hands. There must be something wrong here. You didn't say that, of course.
The carrier set his grip upon the collar of the toy merchant and shook him like a reed. Listen to me, and take care that you hear me right. Listen to me. Do I speak plainly?
Plainly indeed.
I sat upon that hearth last night, all night. I called up her whole life, day by day, and upon my soul, she is innocent if there is one to judge the innocent and the guilty.
If that is your opinion.
So let her go. Now, it's over.
Oh, no, John, not over. Do not say it's over yet. Not quite yet. I have heard your noble words. I could not steal away pretending to be ignorant of what has affected me with such deep gratitude. Do not say it's over till the clock has struck again.
No hand can make the clock which will strike again for the hours that are gone. But let it be so, if you will, my dear. It will strike soon. It's of little matter what we say. I'd try to please you in a harder case than that.
Well, I must be off. When the clock strikes again, it'll be necessary for me to be on my way to church. Good morning, John Peerybingle. I'm sorry to be deprived of the pleasure of your company. I'm sorry for the loss. And the occasion of it, too.
I have spoken plainly, said the carrier, accompanying him to the door.
Oh, quite.
And you'll remember what I've said.
If you compel me to make the observation, said Tackleton, previously taking the precaution of getting into his chaise, I must say that it was so very unexpected that I'm far from being likely to forget it.
The better for us both. Goodbye. I give you joy.
I wish I could give it to you, as I can't. Thank you. Between ourselves, I don't much think I shall have the less joy in my married life, because May hasn't been too officious about me and too demonstrative. Goodbye. Take care of yourself.
The carrier stood looking after him until he was smaller in the distance than his horse's flowers and favors near at hand. Then, with a deep sigh, went strolling like a restless, broken man among some neighboring elms.
His little wife, being left alone, sobbed piteously, and once or twice she laughed so heartily, triumphantly, and incoherently, still crying all the time, that Tilly was quite horrified.
Oh, if you please don't. It's enough to dead and bury the babies. It is, if you please.
Will you bring him sometimes to see his father, Tilly? Inquired her mistress, drying her eyes. When I can't live here and have gone to my old home?
Oh, if you please, don't, cried Tilly, throwing back her head and bursting out into a howl. She looked at the moment uncommonly like Boxer. Oh, if you please don't. Oh, what has everybody gone and been and done with everybody, making everybody else so wretched? Oh. The soft-hearted slow boy trailed off at this juncture into such a deplorable howl, the more tremendous from its long suppression, that she must infallibly have awakened the baby and frightened him into something serious, probably convulsions, if her eyes had not encountered
Caleb Plummer leading in his daughter. Now, this spectacle restoring a sense of the proprieties.
She stood for some few moments, silent, with her mouth wide open, and then posting off to the bed on which the baby lay asleep, and danced in a weird St. Vitus manner.
Mary, not at the marriage?
I told you would not be there, Mum. I heard as much last night, but bless you, said the little man, taking her tenderly by both hands. I don't care what they say. I don't believe them. There ain't much of me, but that little should be torn to pieces sooner than I trust a word against you. And he put his arms about her and hugged her as a child might have hugged one of his own dolls. Bertha couldn't stay at home this morning. She was afraid, I know, to hear the bells ring, and couldn't trust herself to be so near them on their wedding day. So we started in good time and came here. I've been thinking of what I've done. I've been blaming myself till I hardly knew where to turn for the distress of mind I've caused her. I've come to the conclusion that I'd better, if you'll stay here with me, Mum, the while, to tell her the truth.
May, where is your hand? Ah, here it is. I heard them speaking softly among themselves last night of some blame against you. They were wrong.
The carrier's wife was silent. Caleb answered for her.
They were wrong.
I knew it. I told them so. I scorn to hear a word blame her with justice. No, I am not so blind as that.
Her father went on one side of her,
while Dot remained upon the other, holding her hand.
I know you all better than you think, but none so well as her. Not even you, Father. There is nothing half so real and so true about me as she is. If I could be restored to sight this instant and not a word were spoken, I could choose her from a crowd. My sister.
Bertha, my dear, I have something on my mind I want to tell you while we three are all alone. Now hear me kindly. I have a confession to make to you, my darling.
A confession, Father.
My dear, hear me, forgive me. The world you live in, heart of mine, doesn't exist as I have represented it. These eyes that you have trusted in, they've been false to you. I've altered objects, I've changed the characters of peoples, I've invented many things that never have been just to make you happy. I've had concealments from you, put deceptions on you, God forbid me, and surrounded you with fancies.
But living people are not fancies, she said hurriedly. You can't change them.
Now, there's one person that you know, my dove, a hard master to you and me, my dear, for many years. Ugly in his looks and in his nature, cold and callous always. Unlike what I have painted him to you in everything, my child, in everything.
Why? Why did you ever do this? She had been but a short time in this passion of regret.
When the cricket on the hearth, unheard by all but her, began to chirp, not merrily, but in a low, faint, sorrowing way.
Dot, tell me what my home is, what it truly is.
It is a poor place, Bertha, very poor and bare indeed. The house will scarcely keep out the wind and rain another winter. It is as roughly shielded from the weather, Bertha, as your poor father in his sackcloth coat.
Mary, look across the room to where we were just now, to where my father is. My father, so compassionate and loving to me, and tell me what you see.
I see an old man sitting in a chair and leaning sorrowfully on the back with his face resting on his hand, as if his child should comfort him, Bertha.
The blind girl broke away from her and throwing herself upon her knees before him, took the grey head to her breast. It is my sight restored. It is my sight. I have been blind and now my eyes are open. I never knew him. To think I might have died and never truly seen the father who has been so loving to me. And in my blindness, I believed him, said the girl. And having him beside me, day by day, so mindful of me, always, never dreamed of this.
Fresh, smart father in the blue coat, Bertha. Oh, he's gone.
Dot's whole attention had been concentrated during this discourse upon the father and the daughter. She saw that the clock was within a few minutes of striking and fell immediately into a nervous and excited state.
Father, Mary,
Yes, yes, dear. Here she is.
there is no change in Dot. You never told me anything of her that was not true.
Nothing could improve her, Bertha.
More changes than you think for may happen, though, my dear. Changes for the better, I mean. Changes for great joy to some of us. You mustn't let them startle you too much, if any such should ever happen and affect you. Are those wheels upon the road? You've a quick ear, Bertha. Are they wheels?
Yes, coming very fast.
I know you have a quick ear because I have noticed it often, and because you were so quick to find out that strange step last night. Though, as I just now said, there are great changes in the world, great changes, and we can't do better than anything than to prepare ourselves to be surprised at hardly anything.
Now, Caleb wondered what this meant, perceiving that she spoke to him no less than to his daughter.
They are wheels indeed, coming nearer, nearer, very close. And now you hear them stopping at the garden gate. And now you hear a step outside the door. The same step, Bertha, is it not? And now...
Dot uttered a wild cry of uncontrollable delight, and running up to Caleb, put her hands upon his eyes.
As a young man rushed into the room, and flinging away his hat into the air, came sweeping down upon them.
Is it over?
Yes.
Happily over?
Yes.
Do you recollect the voice, dear Caleb? Did you ever hear the like of it before?
If my boy in the golden South Americas was alive...
He is alive! Shrieked Dot, removing her hands from his eyes and clapping them in ecstasy. Look at him! See where he stands before you, healthy and strong. Your own dear son, your own dear living, loving brother, Bertha.
The carrier, entering, started back, as well he might, to find himself in such good company.
John, look here. My own boy from Golden South Americas, my own son. Him that you fitted out and sent away yourself. Him that you were always such a friend to.
The carrier advanced to seize him by the hand, but recoiling at some feature in his face, awakened a remembrance of the deaf man in the cart, and said, "Edward, was it you?"
Now tell him all, Edward, and don't spare me, for nothing shall make me spare myself in his eyes ever again.
I was the man.
And could you steal disguised into the house of your old friend? There was a frank boy once. How many years is it, Caleb, since we heard that he was dead, and had it proved, we thought, who never would have done that?
There was a generous friend of mine once, more a father to me than a friend, who never would have judged me or any other man unheard. You were he. So I am certain you will hear me now.
The carrier, with a troubled glance at Dot, who still kept far away from him, replied, "Well, that's but fair. I will."
You must know that when I left here, a boy, I was in love, and my love was returned. She was a very young girl who, perhaps you may tell me, didn't know her own mind, but I knew mine, and I had a passion for her.
You had? You?
Indeed, I had, and she returned it. I have ever since believed she did, and now I am sure she did.
Heaven help me, this is worse than all.
Constant to her, and returning, full of hope, after many hardships and perils to redeem my part of our old contract, I heard, 20 miles away, that she was false to me, that she had forgotten me and had bestowed herself upon another and a richer man. I had no mind to reproach her, but I wished to see her, and to prove beyond dispute that this was true. I hoped she might have been forced into it against her own desire and recollection. It would be a small comfort, but it would be some, I thought, and on I came. That I might have the truth, the real truth, observing freely for myself and judging for myself without obstruction on the one hand, or presenting my own influence, if I had any, before her on the other. I dressed myself unlike myself, you know how, and waited on the road, you know where. You had no suspicion of me, neither had she, pointing to Dot, until I whispered in her ear at that fireside, and she so nearly betrayed me.
But when she knew that Edward was alive and had come back, and when she knew his purpose, she advised him by all means to keep his secret close, for his old friend John Peerybingle was much too open in his nature and too clumsy in all artifice. Being a clumsy man in general, to keep it for him. And when she, that's me, John, told him all, and how his sweetheart had believed him to be dead, and how she had at last been persuaded by her mother into a marriage, which the silly dear old thing called advantageous, and when she, that's me again, John, told him they were not yet married, though close upon it, and that it would be nothing but sacrifice if it went on, for there was no love on her side, and when he went nearly mad with joy to hear it, then she, that's me again, she said she would go between them, as she had done in old times, John, and would sound his sweetheart and be sure that what she, me again, John, said and thought was right. And it was right, John, and they were brought together, John, and they were married, John, an hour ago.
And here's the bride, and Gruff and Tackleton may die a bachelor.
And I'm a happy little woman, May. God bless you.
Amid the tumult of emotions in his breast, the honest carrier had stood confounded. Flying now toward her, Dot stretched out her hand to stop him and retreated as before.
No, John, no. Hear all. Don't love me any more, John, till you've heard every word I have to say. It was wrong to have a secret from you, John. I'm very sorry. I didn't think it any harm till I came and sat down by you on the little stool last night. But when I knew by what was written in your face that you had seen me walking in the gallery with Edward, and when I knew what you thought, I felt how giddy and how wrong it was. But oh dear John, how could you think so? When I was sad about this intended marriage, dear, it was because I remembered May and Edward, such young lovers, and knew that her heart was far away from Tackleton. You believe that now? My dear, good, generous John, when we were talking the other night about the cricket, I had it on my lips to say that at first I did not love you quite so dearly as I do now. That when I first came home here, I was half afraid I mightn't learn to love you every bit as I hoped and prayed I might, being so very young, John. But dear John, every day and hour I loved you more and more.
You may be sure the carrier was in a state of perfect rapture, and you may be sure that Dot was likewise.
And you may be sure they all were, inclusive of
Miss Slowboy, who wept copiously for joy and wishing to include her young charge in the general interchange of congratulations, handed round the baby to everybody in succession as if it was something to drink.
But now the sound of wheels was heard outside the door, and somebody exclaimed that Gruff and Tackleton was coming back. Speedily that worthy gentleman appeared, looking warm and flustered.
What's the devil this, John Peerybingle? There's some mistake. I appointed Mrs. Tackleton to meet me at the church, and I swear I passed her on the road on the way. Oh, here she is. But I beg your pardon, sir. I haven't the pleasure of knowing you, but if you can do me the favor to spare this young lady, she has a rather particular engagement this morning.
But I can't spare her. I couldn't think of it.
What do you mean, you vagabond?
I am sorry, sir, said Edward.
Holding out May's left hand and especially the third finger.
That the young lady can't accompany you to church, but as she has been there once this morning, perhaps you'll excuse her.
Tackleton looked hard at the third finger and took a little piece of silver paper, apparently containing a ring, from his waistcoat pocket. Miss Slowboy, will you have the kindness to throw that on the fire. Thank ye.
It was a previous engagement, quite an old engagement, that prevented my wife from keeping her appointment with you, I assure you.
Mr. Tackleton will do me the justice to acknowledge that I revealed it to him faithfully, and that I told him many times I could never forget it.
Oh, certainly, to be sure. Oh, it's all right. It's quite correct. Mrs. Edward Plummer, I infer.
That's the name, returned the bridegroom.
Ah, and I shouldn't have known you, sir, said Tackleton, scrutinizing his face narrowly and making a low bow. I give you joy, sir.
Thank you.
Mrs. Peerybingle, said Tackleton, turning suddenly to where she stood with her husband, I am sorry. You haven't done me a great kindness, but upon my life I am sorry. You are better than I thought you. John Peerybingle, I am sorry. You understand me, and that's enough. It's quite correct. Ladies and gentlemen all, perfectly satisfactory. Good morning. And with these words, he carried it off and carried himself off too, merely stopping at the door to take the flowers and favors from his horse's head and kick that animal once, as a mean of informing him that there was a screw loose in his arrangements.
Of course, it became a serious duty now to make such a day of it. Accordingly, Dot went to work to produce such an entertainment, and in a very short space of time she was up to her dimpled elbows in flour, and whitening the carrier's coat every time he came near, by stopping him to give him a kiss.
Ah, that good fellow washed the greens and peeled the turnips and broke the plates and upset the pots full of water on fire and made himself useful in all sorts of ways.
And everybody tumbled over Tilly Slowboy and the baby everywhere. Tilly never came out in such force before. She was a stumbling block in the passage at 5:20 past 2, a man trap in the kitchen at 2:30 precisely. The baby's head was, as it were, a test and touchstone for every description of matter, animal, vegetable, and mineral. Nothing was in use that day that didn't come at some time or other into close acquaintance with it.
Then there was a great expedition set on foot to go and find out Mrs. Fielding, and to bring her back, by force if needful, to be happy and forgiving. And when the expedition first discovered her, she would listen to no terms at all, but said an unspeakable number of times that ever she should have lived to see the day, and couldn't be got to say anything else except, "Now carry me to the grave," which seemed absurd on account of her not being dead or anything at all like it. After a time, she lapsed into a state of dreadful calmness, and observed she had foreseen that she would be exposed, and that she was glad to find it was the case, and begged they wouldn't trouble themselves about her, for what was she? Oh dear, a nobody! Taking advantage of this crisis in her feelings, the expedition embraced her, and she very soon had her gloves on, and was on her way to John Peerybingle's.
To have missed the dinner were to have been missed a jolly and as stout as meal as any man need eat.
There was a tap at the door, and a man came staggering in without saying "with your leave" or "by your leave," with something heavy on his head, setting this down in the middle of the table, symmetrically, in the center of the nuts and apples. He said, "Mr. Tackleton's compliments, and as he hasn't got no use for the cake himself, perhaps you'll eat it." And with those words, he walked off.
There was some surprise among the company, as you may imagine. Mrs. Fielding, being a lady of infinite discernment, suggested that the cake was poisoned, and related a narrative of a cake which had turned a seminary for young ladies blue. I don't think anyone had tasted it when there came another tap at the door, and the same man appeared again, having under his arm a vast brown paper parcel.
"Mr. Tackleton's compliments, and he sent a few toys for the babby. They ain't ugly." After the delivery of which expressions, he retired again.
The whole party would have experienced great difficulty in finding words for their astonishment, even if they had had ample time to seek them. But they had none at all, for the messenger had scarcely shut the door when behind him there came another tap, tap,
and Tackleton himself walked in. "Mrs. Peerybingle," said the toy merchant, hat in hand, "I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than I was this morning. I have had time to think of it. John Peerybingle, I'm sour by disposition. I can't help being sweetened, more or less, by coming face to face with such a man as you. Caleb, this unconscious little nurse gave me a broken hint last night, of which I have found the thread. I blush to think how easily I might have bound you and your daughter to me. What a miserable idiot I was when I took her for one. Friends, one and all, my house is very lonely tonight. I have not so much as a cricket on my hearth. I've scared them all away. Be gracious to me and let me join this happy party."
He was at home in 5 minutes. You never saw such a fellow. What had he been doing with himself all his life, never to have known before his great capacity of being jovial? Or what had the fairies been doing with him to have effected such a change?
John, you won't send me home this evening, will you?
He had been very near, though.
There was a dance in the evening.
May and Edward got up amid great applause to dance alone.
Bertha plays her liveliest tune.
Suddenly, the carrier flings his pipe away, takes Dot round the waist, dashes out into the room, and starts off with her toe and heel quite wonderfully.
Tackleton no sooner sees this than he skims across to Mrs. Fielding, takes her round the waist, and follows suit.
Caleb no sooner sees this than he clutches Tilly Slowboy by both hands and goes off.
Miss Slowboy, firm in the belief that diving hotly in among the other couples and effecting any number of concussions with them is your only principle of footing it.
Hark! How the cricket joins in with its chirp, chirp, chirp!
And how the kettle hums.
And thank you to our cast. Bows, everybody. Applause. Thank you very much for joining us for Cricket on the Hearth on this 12th day of Christmas. If you wish to donate, differentstagestheater.org, hit the donate button, or any theater of your choice. Thank you and good night.